Hey everybody, welcome back to another Wiser Wednesday. Exciting discussion today with John Ratliff, who's CEO of Aligned 5 and Scaling Up Coaches. We're talking about scaling up and selling up. So something that John's got a lot of experience in doing. Before we start, I'm James Potten. I believe in a world of entrepreneurial success without burnout. And the final word, burnout, being, I think, really important part of the discussion today. So, John, a little bit of background. You've done stand-up comedy on the famous Carolines on Broadway, so I'm expecting a high-energy, fun discussion today. You also offered a scholarship for like bowling at college. Is that like 10-pin bowling or?
Yeah, 10-pin bowling. I had 2 scholarship offers to college, but talk about burnout. I was so burned out by then. It was part of my life since I was 5 or 6 years old, and I had 2 full rides, Seton Hall and Wichita State, and I turned them both down and ended up retiring from 10-pin bowling at the tender age of 17.
Excellent. Well, we'll have to have a game someday. So,
Sure.
it's so I think you're based. Are you in Philadelphia at the moment?
Yeah, we're outside of Philadelphia. Yeah, Philly
Right,
suburbs.
Okay. Yeah, so we met in NECA in 2016. We were doing like business brainstorming in the morning, sort of Virgin Unite and other sort of concepts. You actually did some of the talks on the sort of entrepreneurial journey. I was kite surfing in the afternoon. Were you kite surfing then? I can't remember.
No, not yet. I was not then, and I'm still not, but it's coming this year. It's actually on my goals list this year.
Excellent. I think your daughter's into it now?
My daughter's probably one of the best kiters in the BVI now, but I'm just her cheerleader. I don't get to go.
Amazing. So. Yeah. No, I've seen some of your posts. So I really enjoyed your honesty, like when we were chatting out and when you were presenting out in NECA, and like really looking forward to, just digging into like, that entrepreneur. There's something in entrepreneurs, I don't know, we're quite wired, right? There's something that goes on. So let's dig into that. And this is also like framed with the sort of march of AI coming through. It's happening so quickly. It's a really odd period, and what's interesting is people are either like waking up to it or people are burying their head in the sand. So what does it mean? For what we do, businesses, being human, all of those types of things. So we're going to dig into values, purpose, passion today. So if you've got questions, welcome to put those in the chat, and we'll try and answer some at the end. So look, let's just dig into your journey, John. Tell us about how you ended up your entrepreneurial journey. How did you end up where you are now?
So, I was that kid in when you're 10, 11 years old, everyone says, what do you want to do? And I never said fireman or policeman. I didn't know the word entrepreneur as a 10-year-old, but I said, yeah, I think I want to own a business one day. And my grandmother, God rest her soul, still made fun of me all the time about that. Why don't you find something normal like other people do? And but I knew from an early age, that was kind of the path that I wanted to take. So, I had a little marketing company in college, and then I got out of college and did what most smart college kids do. I moved home and screwed around all summer. And finally, it was like September, and some friends had gone back to school, and I had a buddy in law school, went back to law school. And my mom looked at me and said, hey, are you ever going to get a job, or are you just going to, sit around here and do nothing? So I ended up I only ever had 2 jobs in my life. This was the second one. And, I was a commission-only salesperson selling wireless phones back when like wireless phones were brand new. It was 1993. Awesome. And I knew that wasn't for me as an employee. I was working for a guy that really wasn't a very good guy, didn't treat people well. And so I lasted 6 months there, and then actually conned the wireless carrier to let me open my own store. I didn't think you couldn't do that when you were 22. So somehow they said yes, and I opened a store, and then opened a second store soon thereafter. And in the back of that second store, there was a little, old-fashioned answering service, which was 3 people answering the phone with pieces of paper and pens and taking messages. And so the guy that I worked for 2 years later came back to me, and, I'd grown this business now to about 40 employees and 2 stores. And he said, hey, have you ever thought about selling your company? And I was 24 at the time, and no, I hadn't. But I made the classic young entrepreneur mistake and said yes, and went down the path that we advise against today, which is having only one buyer when you sell your business and being a terrible negotiator and all the other things. But he wrote a check, and I'll never forget it, for $103,000, which I was positive at the age of 24 was the best I was ever going to do in my life. So I said, sure.
Why the three? What was the three?
But I have no idea how we named it. It was a multiple of our recurring revenue. Back then when you sold a phone, the carrier paid you like 3% of everybody's bill every month. So it was I think 2 times whatever we were getting in every month from that, or every year from that. So I said yes. I took the check. And then I realized I needed something to do. The second classic, like, sell your company mistake. What am I going to do next? And the guy that was my landlord with that little answering service in the back said, hey, you should go open one of these in Delaware, which is the next state over, and close to Pennsylvania. But back then, you really couldn't compete. These little call centers couldn't compete outside their very local market. So I had nothing else to do. And I said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. I got hooked up with their vendor for equipment, and I did the third dumbest thing in my life, which was start a 24/7 365 business with no employees. So I was the only employee. I was answering the phones and cleaning the bathroom and trying to sign up new customers, and it was ridiculous. But yeah,
that's way to learn, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I lived in an apartment that was somehow zoned commercial with residential all around. And eventually we got busy enough, the phone would start to ring at night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I was the only one there, and I had to sleep sometimes. So I had a big buzzer that I put on the desk next to my bed. And when the phone would ring, this buzzer would go off and wake me from the dead, and I'd have to get up. And I set it up so I had to walk about 50 feet to get to where you had to answer the phone, which hopefully was enough time to wake up out of a dead sleep. I started in 95. This was by like 1997. It was really bad. I don't remember most of 1997. I was so sleepy. My neighbors loved me though, because the buzzer was going off all night long, and the thin walls, they could hear it. So, yeah, ultimately, we started to hire employees, and that business very slowly grew, 95 to 2002 to get to $1 million in turnover, $1 million in revenue. And then in 2003, a buddy of mine came to me and said, hey, have you thought about buying other companies? And meanwhile, I was just trying to hold on to the one that I had because it was a disaster. I said, no, we don't have any cash. Like, we don't have any money. How the hell are we going to buy other companies? And he said, well, I've got a really good relationship with this local bank, and I think they might be interested. So long story short, we built a relationship with the bank, and we end up buying one, and then, in a really funny story, another one 60 days later. And that really cemented our relationship with the bank. And then we did what we said we were going to do. We grew the way we said we were going to grow. By the way, when I say we, I mean me. It was only this.
Still you answering the phones. And
yeah, exactly. Now, my mom did work for me. She would kind of answer the phone and do our books. She used
just
to
the night shift, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, no. She was day shift so that she could rag me all day long. So she did our books, wrote everything by hand. And every day for about 3 years, I heard the exact same thing. John, this is the dumbest idea you've ever had. You should get rid of this thing. Every day, 3 years. Even on the weekend, she would call and tell me that. So we're growing. In 2003, we do our first acquisition, then our second. We do another one in 2004, and then another one towards the end of 2004, a couple in 2005. Long story short, we string together 24 buy-side acquisitions, grow to about 650 employees, and then sold the company in 2012.
Amazing.
And we sold to a strategic buyer. That was really the first experience I had with, we were buying them for 3 to 4 times EBITDA, free cash flow, basically. And we sold for almost 14.5 times free cash flow. So we sold to a buyer that valued us over and above the cash flow of the business on a strategic level. And that kind of launched my journey into M&A and Align 5 and some of the stuff we're going to talk about. So
brilliant. Yeah. I mean, there's so much in that to discuss. And obviously you've, you cracked the kind of code on an industry where there's a high turnover of staff? So
Yeah, so I talked about, and you'll hear the theme throughout, kind of my discontent. And one of my real moments of discontent was, it was 2007, I think, or 2008. And we were growing fast, and I was very active in our industry trade group. And then we had an equipment platform that we used that was probably the gold standard in the industry. And I was really active on the users group for that equipment platform. In fact, I became the president of the users group. We had about probably 350 or so members, I think. And there was a company in Canada that was almost a mirror image of ours, maybe 2/3 of our size, but very similar. And I did what you do at conferences, especially with Canadians. I sat at the bar and had about 10 beers with the other CEO. And on beer like number 8, he said, hey, do you track your frontline employee turnover? And I said, yeah, we do. And he said, what is it? And I said, we're about 115%. 115%, meaning we hire more employees every year than we have. And he looks me dead in the eye and he goes, man, that's fantastic. And I said, fantastic? Like, what are you talking about? He goes, we're at like 125. Our industry average is 150, and we're both beating the average. And we were well-run companies, and he was a good guy, and
wow,
I felt like I was a good guy. And I said, why do we tolerate that? That's insane. So I go back. We were a scaling up methodology practitioner back then. Now I own the Scaling Up Coaches organization, so I still believe in it, whatever, 15 years later. But
yeah.
So we went back, and part of that methodology is a quarterly planning process. So normally with the team would come up with the objectives for the quarter. But in this case, I went back and said, listen, we have to get on top of this turnover problem. By the way, 115% turnover, hourly employees. We had about, at the time, maybe 400 or so. We had 100 salaried employees, 3% turnover. You can imagine what a fun place that was to go to work in. Right? I mean, the hourly people hated the salary people, and vice versa. It was toxic.
Yeah.
So I said, we got to fix this. And that really started us on a journey towards culture, core values. We created a program called Dream On that I probably talked to you about on Necker, where we created like an internal Make-A-Wish type charity model, but for our team.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And it didn't happen overnight. In fact, it didn't happen over a year, but eventually we turned the tide, and we really learned about how to build a great culture. And by then it was I had a great senior team, and they were, they executed a really beautiful vision around culture. And so our frontline turnover went from 115 at the 8 beer meeting to 18% when we sold the company. And that was one of our, in the call center space, it was us and Zappos ever got to 18% turnover. It was really a game changer. So,
and having experienced M&A, it is the hardest part is the people, and being through it like 3 or so times, like the most important thing I would now look at is what's their values. Let's put our values and their values next to each other and see like what, is there any alignment here? Because otherwise this is going to be really hard.
Yeah, it's M&A for mergers and acquisitions. There's no such thing as a merger. They're all acquisitions. We should drop the M. It's silly to even talk about. You cannot bring 2 cultures together and marry them together and maintain 2 separate cultures. It's just impossible. So one is gonna supersede the other, and you have to be really thoughtful about which one that is. And I actually believe on the buy side, and I believe it because we watched it happen so many times. We bought 24 companies. We got an arbitrage. If we could find a company that was moderately performing, so we would never buy a turnaround, because one of our rules was we didn't fire people on the way in. There was everyone's job was protected. Even if it was totally redundant with something we were doing, it was protected. So we would buy companies that were, modestly performing, mediocre, I'll say. And almost every single one, at least 22 of the 24, and that's only because I can't think of all 24 at the moment, but had kind of mediocre culture to go with their mediocre performance.
Yeah.
We learned pretty quickly how to install our culture right away for the front line, especially. And just by changing the culture, we would be able to extract 10 to 15 more points of margin without making any other change.
Amazing.
And we learned really quickly that one of our core competencies was arbitrage from improving company culture through acquisition. So we didn't set out to do that. It was sort of an outcome that happened, but it was a powerful one.
Brilliant.
You know, if you can buy a company for 4 times EBITDA and improve the margin 15 points, now all of a sudden you paid 2.5 times EBITDA. And that, you know, you do that 15 or 20 times and it really stacks up.
Yeah. Amazing. And you know, in some respects, it's through this, I suppose, innate drive in you to want to give. You know, the Make-A-Wish kind of model is a talk to us about that. What is that? Yeah. That route? Yeah,
so we obviously both know Joe Polish from Genius Network. It's how we ended up on Necker, probably in the first place. Yannick Silver and Joe would run that trip.
Yeah.
And I did an interview with Joe about culture, and it was, I mean, it was one of those that we were almost to the end. I'm like, wow, this is really going great. And Joe, if you know him, is a total smart aleck. So we get to the end, and Joe says to me, hey, John, all this sounds great. I totally resonate with all of it. And I'm like, oh, good. Here comes the softball wrap up. And he goes, but what if you just don't like people? And I was like, all right, you bastard. I know what you're trying to do here. And I thought about it for a second, and I was going to make a, cheeky remark. But instead I said, Joe, actually, I know you're trying to be a smart aleck, but it's a really good question because not everybody, and I'm one of them. I'm an introvert. Like, it's painful for me to be extroverted with people. But here's what I think as an entrepreneur is not only our privilege, but also our responsibility and our right. So, and this is an audience of entrepreneurs, so I can say this. I normally don't say this if I'm speaking to audiences with lots of team members and stuff, but we've built a vision for our business. We have chosen the really hard and lonely path of entrepreneurship. And the fact that people show up every day to take our vision, because we can't do it by ourselves, especially, as you scale, to take our vision and put it out in the world. You don't have to like them. You don't have to love them. You don't have to be super extroverted and have this altruism where you want to give. But man, you have to respect the fact that they showed up every day to help you. And that has to make you deeply grateful. Even if you don't like them, you have to be deeply grateful that they're there to drive your vision, not the other way around. So it's your responsibility to do anything you possibly can to make their experience better, to recognize the fact that they're there to help you. It's like the simplest formula in business, yet it's one of the most misunderstood. And I had to get smacked upside the head a bunch of times to figure it out. But, now my goal is to help other people figure it out without going through all the pain that
Yeah. Well, in the environmental consultancy, it took us 6 years of not doing it right to then get it right the next 6 years, and it was literally the point that we started focusing on culture and actually working out that purpose mattered and all these kind of things that don't necessarily, you definitely don't get taught it anywhere, and it only starts to make sense once you've experienced what it's like once you get it right.
Well, and it's not on the balance sheet. So if you're financially oriented, it's hard to see. I had the guy that said, hey, I've got the bank relationship. One of my best friends, I was the best man in his wedding. He's a CPA, and he's a CPA that really kind of fancies himself as an entrepreneur because he started his own practice. But at his core, he's a CPA and type A driven guy. And when we sold the company, he had equity in exchange for helping us with our acquisition strategy. And with tears in his eyes at our exit, he said, the greatest lesson you ever taught me is not everything shows up on the balance sheet, and there is a return for spending the extra resources and treating people the right way. And he said, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I'd have never believed that. I
Mm-hmm.
never, ever would have. And it changed the way he practices accounting to this day. So
the old adage that they know the cost of everything and the value of nothing, huh?
Exactly. And, here's what I'll say. And again, through our work through scaling up, we see thousands of companies, successes, mostly successes. We feel like the methodology works well, but failures as well. And I've seen lots of mediocre culture companies succeed, right? It's not a yes or no, a black and white option. You can, kind of go through life and not really care and have subpar culture and gut your way to success. You can also go off the cliff and fail. But it's hard to think of a lot of examples of companies that nailed culture, nailed core values, nailed purpose, had a team of people ready to run through a wall that failed. And yeah, of course, there's examples. There's always outlier examples. But why not stack the deck in your favor for success? It's more being thoughtful than it is resources and everything else. I know that every dollar we ever spent on driving culture returned itself, but we got tired of counting because it was exponential, at least 10x, 20x, 100x. I don't know, but way more than negative. So why not? It's just a little extra time and effort and creativity to drive great culture. It stacks the deck so much in your favor. It's crazy not to. Now, one caution, and this is super important. You can't fake it. You have to be authentic. So if you're going to put in the foosball table and the nice coffee and the snack bar, but you're going to wake up every day and be resentful of it all, people that were mediocre engaged yesterday, if they feel like you're trying to manipulate them into thinking there's a great culture when there isn't, when they know you don't care, because they can see right through your authenticity.
Yeah.
Yesterday, they were going to be mediocre engaged and kind of care, kind of not, give you some decent effort. Today, if you're trying to manipulate them and they think that, they're going to be engaged, fully engaged in making your life a living hell to get back for the manipulation. So don't do anything at all to drive culture unless you really believe it's your responsibility. So it's a mindset. This is so important. I can't tell you how many times I've watched people try and fake it and it blows up in their face. And then they come back and go, that culture stuff doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, no. You didn't work because you didn't believe it. So mindset and then activities, not the other way around.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that there is something in it where we did find that we set out a vision for where we wanted to go, but we were honest about the fact that we weren't there. And that's okay. If you say this is, we know we're not there, but this is what we aspire to achieve. As long as you can have that honest discussion, then it still works.
That's the key word. You were honest. Like, people love when you're vulnerable and authentic. Like, our culture sucked. We had 115% turnover. We launched all these programs. We didn't say, hey, it's great.
You couldn't remember everyone's name in the business, huh?
No, yeah, exactly. Like, it wasn't going to change overnight, but we were, we fell on the sword and said, hey, we understand it's not very good right now, but give us a shot to fix it. So
there's also I've taken quite an interest in almost like the shadow side of things, and there is a shadow side to giving too much. What's your views on that?
So yes, I totally agree, but it goes to another. I have a lot of rants I've learned as I'm 52 now, and I feel like I've earned the right to rant, I guess. I don't know, maybe not, but absolutely. Like, we only got sued. We had 650 employees when we sold. We were in business for 18 years. We had lots of turnover. So you can imagine in the beginning, you can imagine how many total employees we touched throughout our entire kind of life cycle. We literally got sued one time, and it was about 6 months before our exit. And it was a class action lawsuit by a piece of garbage attorney that had a practice suing call center companies from a law from 1930 in the US where miners didn't get paid for the 30 minutes to put on their mining gear. And he was able to fast forward and use this stupid law. And they literally identified a 4-minute window where our system took a little bit longer to log in, and he thought, and it turned out we were paying him for that 4 minutes. But so we get class action sued. It was the only class action that this judge had ever thrown out. Because most of the time class actions always kind of get to at least the point where they get heard. But one of the 4 people in the class was someone that had been given this amazing dream through our Dream On program. And, you know, a couple people on our team were really, really like sideways about it. And it goes back to the rant and, you know, something I think super important. If you can get 70 to 80% of your people fully all in, like totally engaged and ready to run through a wall, that's enough. And it's going to do 2 things. One, you're going to have this group of people that are going to take the company to places you never thought it was possible. But 2, they're going to repel the other 20 or 30% who will eventually leave, which was one of the people in this class. Wasn't a good culture fit. Our culture drove her out. And yeah, she was a little bit resentful about that, even though she had been part of it through the Dream On program. So my rant is, you can't have a rule, a policy, an idea. Like you've got to focus on the 70 or 80% that are really deeply engaged. And the shadow side of it is, don't resent the 20 or 30 that are never going to come along. And that's probably a little bit aside from what you were thinking on the shadow piece. I do believe it can court narcissism in the entrepreneur. You start to become like, oh, you did this and you did this and you did this. And so for us, like when we would get lots of media requests, I would normally have someone else on the team do that. So we really tried hard not to get full of ourselves about these programs, but more importantly, focus on the 70 or 80% that you can help. And, you know, don't get wrapped up. Handbooks is another one. If you've got a company handbook, go back today. This is my challenge to everybody. Go back today and read your handbook.
I thought you were going to say set fire to it.
Well, and if it's, first of all, if it's more than 5 or 6 pages, it's way too long. But more importantly, I want you to take a highlighter and anything in the handbook designed to address the behavior of less than 20 or 10 or even 20%. So anything that's aimed at the bottom 10% of your workforce, like your weird attendance policies and all sorts of, just get rid of it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It can
You're
get
not
so
going to change their behavior anyway, and you're going to piss off your A players. Like, what are we in kindergarten? Like, it's a 100-page handbook. No shit, I'm supposed to come to work on time. Like, thanks for telling me that. Like,
it's really good advice.
Yeah.
Burrito's present everywhere. So yeah, focus on the 80%. 20% of the time on the 80%. So I was also thinking around your, you know, look, I mean, there's also, if you're someone who tends to give, it can like lead to burnout. You know, talk us through some of the challenges you've experienced sort of on your journey.
Yeah. And it's still happening today. It sounds super weird to even say it, but I do believe there's in the world, and I think this came from my parents, certainly, and definitely my grandmother, but you can really bisect the world in 2 parts, givers and takers. Now there's grades on both sides. And I question whether if you're on one side, can you move to the other? Both ways, giver to taker and taker to giver. And yeah, if you're on the giver side of the equation, you open yourself up, you're vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And that's been a challenge for me recently and back then as well, but I can't give up. I always say, after someone takes advantage of me, I always say, that's it, I'm done, like no more. But you're wired, I think, one way or the other. Now, if you're like close to the middle, I think you can cross the chasm from like casual taker to maybe casual giver, but I don't know if you can like really move. Maybe you can. I'd love someone to prove me wrong, but it's still the right way to be. You just have to steel yourself to the fact that you're going to get screwed over every once in a while.
It sounds similar to the hawks and doves model, where ultimately, and like in nature, like cells group together so you know, ultimately hawks can't stay in a community for too long, because the doves group together and eject them, and you know, it's their repeated behavior is to just keep moving on. And yeah, I think sales do it as well. When a bad sale enters, the other sales group together and eject. So there's something just innate in nature that
and diversity is what keeps our species going. Like if everyone were givers in the US, you probably don't do this in the UK, but in the US, we have these 4-way stop sign intersections where everyone comes to the intersection and whoever got there first is supposed to have right away. Well, in a world full of like total givers, no one would be able to go through the intersections, right? You go, no, you go.
It's a bit more of a Canadian way, isn't it? The givers,
yeah.
They was
sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I do think you definitely need diversity, but as someone that identifies as a giver, I guess you do open yourself up to being taken advantage of, but it's kind of the price you pay for all the good that comes with it as well. So,
yeah. So you've you talked about this before in the past. You've sort of made it your mission to talk about like mental health and depression, and it's something that really isn't talked. It is and it isn't. People, like things are opening up for the discussion, but it's still quite difficult to acknowledge. So yeah, I'm you're really I'm inspired by your willingness to talk about it. So yeah,
and again, it goes back, I think, to responsibility. So, and I think when you and I were together last versus now, the conversation's become a lot more robust and it's become a lot more appropriate to talk about. We still have a really long way to go, I feel, and there still is a stigma attached, but some of that stigma is starting to get chipped away. My story was pretty straightforward, the story that you heard me tell. And as a sidebar, I think for this audience specifically, I think part of what predisposes us to be entrepreneurs is we're dissatisfied with the status quo. Like we see a situation that we know is out of balance and we need to fix it, or we know that maybe we're not wired to be part of somebody else's vision. We have to create our own because we're a little bit discontented. So I think there is a self-selection issue in entrepreneurship, and all the research, somewhere between 65 and 85% of entrepreneurs battle depression on some level. The suicide rates are really high, and all sorts of, there's a lot of data around entrepreneurs being highly ADD and prone to depression. So starting from there,
which I wouldn't have known what you're on about until I started to notice that I definitely have like this sort of ADD traits. I'm like, oh my god, like I had, because I couldn't sit down and read a book. I listen to audiobooks because I just can't. I don't have. So it's really weird when you start to notice it. You're like, so having kids teaches you as well, that because you sort of see them and you're like, yeah.
Exactly. So Ned Hollowell is one of the leading writers globally on ADD. He's written 30-ish or so books, and part of the reason he writes so many books is because he'll tell you he's severely ADD, and that's one of his coping mechanisms. But Ned actually is campaigning to change the term from ADD and ADHD. He wants to call it the entrepreneurial trait. Literally, like that's how he sees it. So there is a lot of science behind ADD and the desire to be entrepreneurial. But for me, my situation, as far back as I can remember, at least as a 12-year-old, I battled depression, and I didn't know what it was at the time. And the way I experienced it to this day really is it's kind of like a blanket, and I wear it all the time. Sometimes it's really heavy, but sometimes it's really light and you barely notice that it's there, but it like kind of stays with you throughout the time. And my funny story was I went to a mastermind group with Joe Polish in Phoenix. And, a lot of times they would put like stuff out, when you got there, books and, like gifts or snacks or like stuff. And they'd be at your seat when you arrived. And so I get there and at my seat was a copy of The Untethered Soul written by a guy named Michael Singer. And I looked at it. Now, and I was in my depression went in cycles. I was in a pretty severely low point in the cycle. So the blanket was heavy. I'll just say that. And one of the things that would happen in those cycles was I would lose my ability to read, kind of like what you just said with ADD. It would like hyper ramp up. I could read literally like a page or two, then the words started to look weird and my brain wasn't working right. And to the point where I almost had an MRI because I was convinced I had a brain tumor because I couldn't read, and I'm a learner. Like that's, at my core, I'm a lifelong learner. So not being able to read, and this was before audiobooks were really like super prevalent, was problematic. So I get the book, I shove it in my briefcase, and so I'm on the flight home and I happen to look down at my briefcase and I see the book poking out. And I'm like, I pick it up and I open it and I read like a page, 2 pages, 3 pages. And I'm like 20 pages in and I have the revelation. I'm like, oh, look at that. I'm actually able to read. I don't know what the hell's going on. So I get to like the 4th or 5th chapter and Singer talks about, and this was the moment that I shared on Necker. And I think it's my responsibility to share it forward. Singer talks about when we're biased towards depression, oftentimes what we do is instead of processing negative experiences, we just don't want to feel them and face them. So we like shove them down, like pack them in so that we don't have to deal with them. And he talks about them as actually having physical properties, like they physically exist inside your nervous system. And, his method and he's but by the way, Michael Singer is a mindfulness guy. Like he's one of the leading thought leaders on mindfulness. So his method for dealing with it is he's like, you just kind of relax and like lean away from that negative, re-experience it, process it, and then let it go. And like, just imagine them like going. I'm like, what the hell? I got 4 more hours on this flight. I'm sitting in first class on American Airlines and yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I lean back in the seat and I like start to like, process some stuff and then another. And then he talks about the other thing is when you've crammed all that negative in, like positive energy kind of flows into you, but it can't if it's blocked by all your negative. So I'm like, whatever. And so I process 1 and then 2 and then 3 and they're like kind of coming out. I'm like, oh, this is cool. Well, all of a sudden, like I get like, when you stick your finger in the light socket thing, like I'm like buzzing with this energy and I'm like euphoric almost. And then I realized there are like tears streaming down my face, kind of like when they like drip off your cheek style. Then I look around, I'm like, oh my God, they think I'm going to like probably take this airplane down. Like I'm a terrorist having my like final moment of like release. And then I look like a hot mess. So I had sunglasses on my head. I actually put the sunglasses on, but that feeling like overwhelmed me. And it was just this like almost like a glow or like a buzz of euphoria. And I felt like I processed all that stuff and I got rid of it. That literally stayed with me for weeks, like weeks. I was afraid I was going to lose it. Like I woke up the next day and it was still there. And like, I can even access it now, like kind of thinking about it. But that was the moment where I realized that, yeah, like holding all that stuff in is really holding me back. So statistically on this call, I know there's, a lot of people, there are people on this call right now battling depression. There's probably people on this call that have either contemplated or are currently contemplating suicide. I strongly recommend, and I've made this recommendation now to tens of thousands of people. I've told this story on stages in front of 1,000 people, and I get people that come up to me that I've never met all the time. Like it happens at events and a lot of places I go that say, hey, that book really changed my life. So the book's called The Untethered Soul. It's a guy named Michael Singer, for what it's worth. But just know that if depression is part of who you are and it's been a lifelong struggle, it's also what led you to entrepreneurship, most likely, or at least it's part of your journey. And the more you can integrate it and embrace it instead of just trying to hide from it and talk about it. I think there's power in sharing the story. So, and I feel obligated to do it. Yeah. I don't like doing it, but I feel obligated to do it.
Yeah, no, thank you, John. I think it's really important. I mean, I guess, it is another one of your, sort of phrases, or we all know it in entrepreneurship is lonely at the top. So you often don't feel like there's people that you can relate to, or people that understand quite what you're going through. there's just, you know, an expectation of the answers, which is
Yeah.
bonkers, utterly bonkers, but the reality of the position that we sort of hold.
Well, and it's compounding too. I mean, most of us grew up, I've got really close friends from childhood, and one's a lawyer, one's a school teacher. My two closest friends, lawyer, school teacher, and lots of other professions. But I don't have a childhood friend that I grew up with, or even a college friend that went down the entrepreneurial path. So that I'm like a cartoon character to them, right? I mean, and I've had good success, and we've got, you know, some fun real estate and stuff, and we go and hang out and have fun. And but they literally like, and it, you know, I laugh about it too, but it's really hard to find a peer group of, that's why it's so important. I think masterminds are great, and like to find a peer group of other entrepreneurs that you can just get around and know, even if you don't share your stuff, even if you can just listen and know that, hey, you're not totally alone. You're not the only dumbass that made that mistake. That was the greatest. I told you I was really active in my industry. Up until then, I wasn't active at all with any other entrepreneur. So I spent 8 years thinking I was a complete moron because I couldn't figure any stuff out. And I had employees quitting. And I mean, I had every bad problem you could ever have. And then I got around other entrepreneurs and I was like, wait, you have these problems too? And it was such a, now we're way more hyper connected today. This was in the 90s when, you know, we didn't do this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, being around others that are going through the same journey, that's part of the human experience. We don't do it. I don't think we do it enough.
Yeah. No, like making time for it. It doesn't seem like the thing that's, it feels a bit indulgent, I guess. It doesn't feel like it's going to help you, but the release it has, you know, I credit like the fact that I was, you know, 2012, I was getting an ulcer, couldn't handle like we were going through a rapid growth period, like actually sort of solved the problem. I stepped into the MD role and we went from like 2.8 to 8.9 mil turnover in 1 year. Like how to solve that is a very like, it's a lovely problem to have, but it is a bonkers place to be. And I still had that, I hadn't grown out of like the control need. I hadn't gone through that sort of evolution of understanding that, you know, the sort of, you know, the net's at the top of the bottle, and it's like I was constraining the business, and a number of things like OKRs and just like trying to get everyone knowing what they want to do. But my own personal mindset of going on that journey, I couldn't have done it until I met like a mastermind group. So
yeah, and if we're in the full confession role today, it's embarrassing, but there was a point in time in my company, it was right before we started to buy other companies. So probably, I don't know, 2000 was after 9/11. So it was probably 2001 or two, like late 2001, early 2002. I was so burned out and so depressed and so checked out that I did not show up. I lived 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, like a couple miles from my office. I did not show up in the office for 5 months, and I let a heroin addict, and I mean a heroin addict, run the business, knowing that I was letting a heroin addict run the business for 5 months. A frontline employee who also sadly, and actually not sadly, because she's thriving today. We helped her with that, and she's completely like a rock star today. But at the time, that's who ran the company for 5 months. And I knew it, and I couldn't bring myself to go in. I couldn't get out of bed. So it's it's a lonely journey, and it's okay that it's a lonely journey, but you want to be around other people that have been down the path. So sorry to tell such a sad
with line
story.
5, it's really nice because maybe in 2016, maybe it was one of the sort of dips. It feels like you've got your mojo back with a line 5, and it's really nice to see. I've been seeing your content come out, and you know you're running stuff. So what do you think? What do you see the best entrepreneurs do to push through the kind of 1 mil barrier and sort of truly scale? What is it that they do?
Yeah, and you know, I hate simplistic or over simple sounding solutions, but I think one of the most elegant and important ones. It's so simple, people don't even take it seriously. But the first step on the journey for me and for thousands of other entrepreneurs I've seen do it successfully is a daily gratitude practice. If you can find the 3 seconds it takes every morning, I don't care if it's in a journal or on your phone, or even if you just put a sticky note on your mirror, but 3 things you're grateful for every day, start your day at least in the right mindset. Now, you might get to the office at 8:15, get kicked in the face, and by 8:30, you're already kind of out of it again. But so that's for me step one. And then what's really helped me on my path, being around other entrepreneurs is always, I still go to Necker, and that's part of why I go. Richard Branson's there, and strangely, Richard and I have become, I don't know how or why or how it even happened, but we've become pretty close. But I don't go for that. I go to be around 30 other like-minded entrepreneurs that are somewhere on their full circle of their journey. And I get energy by watching them. And now I feel like, it's the whole sage, elder statesman, whatever happens when you get older. Your kids are young. You don't even know any of this yet. But you reach a point where you start to feel like, I have experiences that I can share with other people. And that energizes me. Like somebody early on for me, when I was really struggling, like in that 5-month period, somebody pulled the curtain back and said, hey, there's a better way. You really don't have to go this direction. There's other paths. And I now feel like it's my responsibility to pay that forward for other people. And that's energizing when you can, especially a young entrepreneur that's got the tiger by the tail, their business is starting to scale, but at their own, it's never worth trading your health, your relationships, and your identity for the success of your company. And if I can find that entrepreneur that's got it, they've got it figured out, the only missing piece is they're selling their soul to do it, and I can show them a little bit different way, like that really energizes me. And I think that's our responsibility, because we know I was in a room last week and of 65 of some of the most successful people on the planet. And we were laughing about how our spouses don't even really understand like what they've been with us a long time, so they get it, but they don't really get it, like the loneliness and that kind of stuff. And how we're all like, we know stuff that most people never had the opportunity to learn, whether it's about business or about health or about life hacking, like all the things we've been exposed to. And it's our privilege to get to share those with others. And oftentimes our spouse bears the brunt of that, because we're like, you got to learn about this biohack. You got to learn about this like gratitude practice. And we're like all over the place. But when we can actually share that with other entrepreneurs, I think there's incredible power in that. And we are privileged and lucky and blessed to know a lot of things that a lot of other people never got exposed to. And what a gift that is.
Yeah. The weird thing is once you've seen it, you don't know that other people don't know it. That's an odd thing. And trying to meet people where they're at, and especially on the scaling journey. Yeah, that's a really tricky tricky challenge as well. I think one of the biggest learns, going back to like partners from Necker, was that we talked about for probably like a whole morning about trying to make sure that you and your partner are sort of on the same like trajectory. You try and like nurture each other to try and help you both go on a sort of similar like growth trajectory, or that was so interesting, because it's easy for one to just shoot off and leave the other behind, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny, my youngest brother got married, and I did kind of the say stuff that's gonna make everyone cry part. And one of my other brothers, like, actually, by the power vested in me by the internet, you're now married. And I gave him 3 pieces of advice from experience, and one of the pieces of advice was 1 + 1 has to equal at least 2, but it can never equal less than 2. And if you come together and get married and lose your independence or try and, merge 2 lives into one, you're really going to struggle. So one of the things as an entrepreneur that has been really important for me is to make sure that my partner has a complete independence from me. And so many times, if, entrepreneurs tend to be type A, and, we sometimes end up with a spouse that's maybe a little bit less type A. And I watched these couples come together, and they were 2 thriving independent people before, and then all of a sudden they're one, and it's really like they've lost their independence. That was one. Second one was don't keep score. I know so many couples that have not made it because, I did the laundry, you got to take out the trash. Well, I took out the trash. Why didn't you walk the dog? And you end up in this competition and keeping score. And then the third one, and I think this goes back to your point of, trying to make sure you grow together and you sort of experience things together, is if you just wake up every day and you say, and this is both partners, not one, because if one does this and the other doesn't, catastrophe. But I looked my brother and his beautiful new bride in the eye, and I said, if you both wake up every day and your whole goal for the day is to make your partner's experience better than it was yesterday. By the way, that was our mantra with employees too.
I was going to say, that's this.
Yeah.
I used to have that as a little alarm on my phone.
Yeah, this totally works in
yeah.
too. But if you both wake up and your whole goal is to make your partner's experience better, and you both have that, you can't help but raise each other's level, because that's your mindset. Yeah. And if it's, what can you do for me? What's in it for me? Me. Then you're, by definition, you're going to go like this or like this. So that mindset, even if your partner's not going to totally buy into all your biohacking weird, like as entrepreneurs, we get exposed to some really weird stuff, right? And we know all these weird things, and we want everyone else to know. Some people aren't ready for that. Like they're not ready to hear about stem cell therapy and this and that. But if you could just both set your goal to raise each other's level every day, then at least your levels are going to move together. Your knowledge may grow apart, but you're going to level up together versus going like this.
Amazing. Yeah. Hey, look, we're running out of time. I know I want to talk a bit about, the selling process. We've actually got a question from Sharon asking, can you tell us about the processes that are key to have in place to successfully scale a business? So in less than like a couple of minutes, are there any like key processes, like non-negotiables?
Yeah. So scaling up is built on 4 ideas: people, strategy, execution, and cash. You've got to get really clear on those 4 disciplines. Make sure you've got the right people doing the right things right. Jim Collins said that. The number 1 discipline that we teach that I think A is non-negotiable and B is the fastest hack to building a successful company is the daily huddle. And the daily huddle is super simple. Every employee, certainly every salaried employee, every day is in a huddle. For us, it was our 13 leadership team. Then they would go with their direct reports, and then they would go 1 level down. So three sets of levels, 3 meetings. What's your number 1 priority? You would go around, and if there's 11 people, it should be an 11-minute meeting. If there's 9 people, 9-minute meeting, no more. Great. You go around, what's your number 1 priority for the day? Everyone would just say it. No discussion, no like, what's your number 1 priority for the day? 2 or 3 key OKRs you're going to report out on, or KPIs if you use that vernacular. And then 1 more round of what, are you stuck anywhere? Are there any roadblocks that you need to remove? No discussion. I may have, you and I might be in a huddle. You might have a roadblock, and I might say, hey, catch up with me after, I can help you with that. But we're not going to take everyone's 38 minutes of time to fix it. 11 people, 11 minutes, 9 people, 9 minutes. Once around, what's your number 1 priority? Couple of, for the group, OKRs, not everyone does 2, just the group 2 or 3. What are you stuck on? And that's it. You move on. If you can build that discipline, there's more to it. It's in the book, Scaling Up. There's more to it. But if you can just build that discipline, you will know as a leader more in a week than you typically learn in a quarter or a year, because you get to see how your people are prioritizing. They each get to read each other's headlines. and everyone's aligned on it eliminates, if you have, I don't know, no one ever told me that in your business. If people are saying no one ever told me that, bye-bye. That goes away with the daily huddle. So that's like the fastest hack I have. I've got 27,000 more, but that would be
it's brilliant. That's brilliant. It is, and I've experienced like the how effective it can be. I've also experienced the problem of deviating from what. So you just got to stay. It's a what meeting. What, not how, not anything else. Just what.
Start at an odd time. Ours started at 9:05. End exactly on time. Even if someone's mid, you end on time. You will build the discipline to go fast enough. It might take.
Okay. Well, in the interest of trying to end on time, I would really like you to give like your key bits of advice on anyone looking to sell up, and that could be in the next 5 years, in the next year, or in the next month. Fire away.
All right, I'll do this in 3 minutes. Number one, know what your industry average multiples are. Know what your company, what your industry trades at, and then put that aside and know that your business is worth what one buyer is willing to pay at one point in time. So you should know your industry multiple to know if you won or lost, but don't get locked in on that. Find a buyer that's willing to value something over and above. And I'm going to try and do this in 2 minutes. The Rembrandts in the attic story. Everybody has Rembrandts in the attic. Imagine you're going to buy a house listed for $1 million. There's 3 bidders. You're one of the 3. We all agree it's worth $1 million. I'm going to bid, you're going to bid, and someone else is going to bid. The seller doesn't know. I don't know. The other bidder doesn't know, but you wandered up into the attic of that house, and behind a post was an original Rembrandt that you know is worth $20 million. The house is only worth $1 million. You are not going to be the losing bidder for that house. You're not going to outbid me. Even if I bid $2 million, you'll bid $3 million because you know you get the Rembrandt in the attic. Every business we've ever worked with has Rembrandts in their attic. It might be their customer list, a piece of software they made. It might be the industry they serve. It might be a core process they have, even the team that they've built. And there is someone else that wants that Rembrandt, that is willing to come along and say, your business, your house is worth $1 million, but I'll give you 19 million because I get the Rembrandt that's in the attic. It's your job to know, because the guy that sold the house didn't know it was up there because he never looked in the attic. It's your job to know what the Rembrandts are in your attic and make sure that when buyers come along, you understand how they see the Rembrandts in your attic and the value that they assign to them.
Brilliant.
Now that's a 2-day course. But that's Rembrandts in the attic in 90 seconds. So that is the most important piece of advice in selling a business. There's the financial value, and then the value of all your strategic stuff, which is all your Rembrandts.
Yeah. And you're also like representation of, you know, is can be super helpful, right? If you don't
yeah. I mean, and listen, if anyone's got questions on that, reach out to us. Kristen Kopp, my chief of staff, she can set up some time. I'm happy to walk someone through that process, because I typically, in a half hour to an hour conversation, help entrepreneurs, even like on the path, like ready to exit, find millions of extra dollars in value. I can't tell you how many 20-minute conversations I've had where we unlock like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, and $10 million later, like in increased value. That, yeah, it happens all the time.
Amazing.
It happened literally last week.
Great. Well, thank you, John. We're out of time, basically. Is there any books? Like, well, one book, and when are you writing your book?
It's in my phone, I think, in a bunch of notes. This has to be the year. I say it every year, but this has to be the year. I'm writing it down. Book.
I'm going to hold you to it. I'm going to message you.
Here you
December.
Go. Book.
In fact, excellent. I'm going to book a meeting in to challenge you to read the draft in December.
I'll take that. That's fair.
So yeah, look, I mean, I think there's so much to take from what you've talked about today, John, and really appreciate that. And it's so hard to fit it all into one hour. I really like the saying, it's not what we've achieved in life, but who we've become. And like, entrepreneurship is, a way to really understand like who we are and what we'd like to become. So thank you. There's a few key bits, like takeaways, I think, is like, if you have $1, spend it on your team. I love that. I think getting representation, like people aren't skilled like at selling. So if you're going to go on that journey, think about that. And yeah, I think check in as well. Check in if you're working really hard, like just check it's not an avoidance of something deeper, like because it's it's really easy to just find ways of not facing like reality. So
100%. Yeah, I mean, and on the help side, you might sell 1 or 2 companies in a lifetime, and sophisticated buyers might buy 27 companies this year. The playing field it's like you've never played golf and your first opponent's Tiger Woods. It's a really unlevel playing field. So.
Well, look, thank you so much, John. Thank you everyone for joining today. Thank you, John. I hope everyone feels slightly wiser this Wednesday as a result of joining. So
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Take care.